Alright, while we're all still patiently waiting for the massive pay-per-view event in October, the UFC was kind enough to give us a legitimately solid fight night card in front of a live crowd in Las Vegas on Mexican Independence Day in NOCHE UFC. Even though this was a fight night, it definitely had a pay-per-view feel to it, especially since from top to bottom it was loaded with huge fights. A few of these fights in particular were some of the most interesting that I've seen in a while, with serious career implications for all the fighters involved. First, the 18-year-old phenom Raul Rojas Jr. made his long-awaited return after getting beaten in a 3-round decision against Christian Rodriguez, which, in hindsight, being only 18 years old, being undefeated, and already fighting in the biggest show in town, that loss probably could end up being one of the best things to happen for him in his career. But despite that loss in April, Raul came out in this one not just looking for the win, but hunting for a finish. Raul was able to connect with a huge left hook that put Terrence Mitchell down, made the Mexican crowd erupt, and from there, Raul was able to secure the TKO finish from ground and pound. For Raul, this was a dominant victory, but he definitely showed how green he is in this fight by getting a little too caught up in trying to brawl against an opponent in Terrence Mitchell that was, in all honesty, tailor-made for Raul to get a big win. That kind of approach from Raul can be very dangerous going forward, but in the end, he was able to get the job done. Next in the co-main event, we had Kevin Holland versus Jack Della Maddalena. Now this has got to be one of the closest fights that I've ever seen. When I was watching this one, I was just hoping that at some point somebody gets a late finish, since if this fight goes to the scorecards, whoever loses is either going to be frustrated thinking that they did enough to win the fight, or is going to have some serious regret feeling like there were just one or two exchanges where they actually opened up a bit and threw something more meaningful away from getting a pretty big victory. In a lot of ways, this fight went exactly as expected, in the sense that Jack Della Maddalena, one of the better boxers in the welterweight division, proved that out of the two fighters that were in the cage on the night, he was definitely the better pure boxer, stringing together extended combinations and catching Holland with big left hooks on the end of those combinations. And then Kevin Holland, a guy who is just giant for 170, being able to kind of poke and prod with his lead hand, land some effective jabs, making the most of his size advantage in the matchup. For pretty much all three of the rounds, it felt like Kevin Holland was doing enough to win the round by picking apart at Jack from a distance, and then Jack would come in with a flurry, landing a bunch of big shots, basically evening the round back up again. This fight is a perfect example of why we need more 10-10 rounds. For Kevin Holland, he's now 1-2 in his last 3, albeit the 2 losses are to some of the better strikers in the entirety of the welterweight division. I would like to see Kevin Holland go up against another ranked guy after this. I feel like Kevin Holland is just on the verge of beating one of these guys that could catapult him into being solidified as a top 10 contender at 170. And I think with the size that he has at that weight class, he could be a huge problem to a lot of top guys. As for Jack, he has had now back-to-back victories, both in fairly close fights. I think in these fights, Jack's been able to prove that he really is a high-level striker at 170 pounds, but I don't know if he's necessarily proved that he can hang with the elite of the elite in that division. I think for Jack, I'd like to see him go up against another guy at a similar ranking as a Kevin Holland, someone else in that 10 to 15 range, and maybe if he's able to pass that test with flying colors, then we start bringing him into the conversation of going up against guys in the top 10. And now, the main event of the evening. Valentina Shevchenko versus Alexa Grasso in the highly anticipated rematch for the Women's Flyweight Championship of the world. This is the fight that everybody was waiting for, to see if, in their last fight, Valentina just had an off night, or if the time has finally come for another challenger to come up and take Valentina's spot as the long reigning defending flyweight champion. Early on in this fight, it looked like Valentina was maybe the more skilled, the more versatile fighter of the two, but then you see the boxing exchanges where it looks like Grasso has noticeably more power in her hands. That power looks like it might have been enough to close that already small skill gap between the two, and that turned this into an extremely competitive fight. Valentina looked like she edged out the first round, then the second round comes along where Grasso was able to land a huge shot, putting Valentina down, making the fight look like it was almost over, and then Valentina shows exactly why she is an all-time great, mixing in some wrestling, getting Grasso to the ground, holding on to her for enough time to recover, and then throwing in some ground and pound. There were a few close rounds in this fight. I thought it was pretty much anyone's fight going into the 5th, and in the 5th, Valentina looked like she was just ready to do whatever it took to get her belt back, keeping good distance on the feet, popping Grasso with the jab over and over and over again, outpointing her until Valentina tried to mix in some grappling, getting reversed by Alexa Grasso, who then in turn starts implementing some of her own ground and pound and then threatening submissions until ultimately Grasso was able to steal the 5th round. And early on she was losing. When this fight went to decision, as we all know now, it was scored as a draw. In all honesty, I'm the kind of person that wants to see even more draws in the sport. You know, I think it really sucks when you see a fight that's super closely contested, but at the end of the day, we gotta choose somebody that has to go home with a loss. So I honestly didn't mind seeing a draw in this one. And then the scorecards came out, where Judge Mike Bell gave Alexa Grasso a 10-8 round in the 5th round. A 5th round that, again, Alexa Grasso early on was losing. Scoring the 5th round as a 10-8 in favor of Grasso is absolutely insane. But in the end, I don't necessarily feel like the fight was all that definitive in either direction. So hopefully this draw leads to a trilogy fight where we can finally find out who is the rightful champion of the women's flyweight division. In the end, NOCHE UFC was one of the best fight night cards I've seen in a very long time. It reminded me a lot of the fight nights in Paris and in London, but honestly, I think this one was even better. From the matchups up and down this card to the actual fights themselves, this one felt like it was practically a pay-per-view card. Hopefully, the UFC can learn from this and put on even more fun, non-pay-per-view cards just like this in the future. Thanks for watching.